Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an assortment of just absolutely terrifying and really mind-blowing experiences. One that will pull at your heartstrings. Before we get into it though, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? All right, guys, so sometime today or later on tonight, I am going to be connecting with Brad to do the interview that he shared the experience with me 2 weeks ago. And I promised that I wouldn't even hint around to what it was because he's the one that heard it. So it is already secondhand. I don't want to have it be third hand, but it is one heck of a crazy experience. Today's first encounter, I shared in Saturday Nightmares Live, and I've actually narrated this encounter like 2, maybe 3 years ago, and I forgot how powerful it really is. Well, you'll see. All right, guys, so today's first experience, I shared this Saturday Nightmares Live from New York, our live stream. I also narrated this 3 years ago, and I really forgot how powerful of an experience this is. It's a feral human experience, and in my own opinion, and I'll explain why after the experience, I believe that these creatures are more dangerous and more terrifying, and once again, my own opinion, than Dogman and Bigfoot. And I never really liked the name Dogman, nor do I like the name feral human. Once again, I'll explain after. This may be very disturbing for some of you. I could never really share this experience in person, but it's easier for me to type out somehow. My wife and I were quite a bit younger. We decided that we would spend the 1976 Bicentennial outdoor. We lived in Pueblo, Colorado at the time and decided to go hiking, fishing, and camping along Lime Creek between Durango and Silverton. There wasn't anything other than brookies in that creek, but they were plentiful and fun to catch. We left our car by the side of the road along Old Lime Creek Road, 5 miles in from the highway, and packed in upstream along the creek with our shepherd Rebel. It only took us about an hour to get where we wanted to camp, a nice meadow beside the creek just before a slot canyon that required you to swim to get any further upstream, either that or take a several-mile detour. We camped uneventfully that night, the 3rd of July, enjoying the sounds of the rippling creek and nature all around us. It was such a nice night that we slept under the stars and did not bother to pitch our little backpacking tent a little cool, but we had a fire going and our lightweight 30-degree bags, so we were pretty comfortable. The next day we had breakfast, packed up, and we all swam our way up creek to the next wide spot with a bit of a bank in the canyon. Only about 150 yards or so. Now, Rebel was never one to turn down the chance of getting wet, but we had to do quite a bit of coaxing to get him to follow us up creek. We fished and splashed upstream a bit, and before we knew it, it was lunchtime. We thought we'd fry up some of those brookies, but we were in this slot canyon that terminated in a fairly deep pool with about a 10-foot rocky waterfall at the end. We decided that I would scale the waterfall and pull the dog and the packs up and then help my wife get up. It was fairly difficult, even with the help of an old cable left over from the mining operation that was hanging down the side of the wall of the canyon. It took a lot of effort, and though we finally made it, we looked back down that waterfall and wondered what the heck we were thinking. Rebel was none too happy about this either, and seemed to get more irritable by the minute. We found enough driftwood at the rocky top of the falls to get a fire started and get the fish fried up, but that was about it. You know that uneasy feeling that people mention while having their experiences and such? It was like a switch turned on and we all of a sudden became aware of our surroundings. It grew like a cancer, and I actually watched the hair on the back of Rebel's neck stand up. My wife felt it as well, and we both noticed that it was getting dark fast down in that canyon. First thought in my head was cat, and I actually felt a little better about that because I figured that a cat would leave us be between the fire and the dog. I told my wife what I thought, and she seemed to feel a little better as well. I did not want to get caught in the dark in that canyon for a bunch of reasons, flash floods, etc. I spied what looked like a mine shaft about 200 feet above us. A heck of a steep climb, but it looked like our best bet. We pulled out our flashlights, and by the time we reached it, it was pitch black. The dog was a mess at this point, whipping around in circles, whining, yelping, and just being generally a pain in the ass. My wife and I were drenched with sweat and immediately began to freeze. July in the mountains is a weird thing. I've seen blizzard conditions before, but this was like someone turned on the deep freeze. We were at what looked like a start of a mine. It only went back about 10 feet, but there was evidence of fires at the mouth, and they were curiously looked fresh. I was too tired to think more about that. I knew we had to get out of our wet clothes, pitch the tent, and climb in our bags before we got hypothermia. That was no fun, let me tell you. Having to do it all by the light of a rapidly dying flashlight, and there was no firewood anywhere close by. I cursed myself several times for letting things get this far out of control. We finally got the tent pitched right there in the back of that little cave, buck naked, as we had no dry clothes left. The sleeping bags were slightly damp as well, even though we had stuffed them in plastic garbage bags before our swimming expedition up the canyon. We froze, and it was miserable. Maybe 1 a.m, I called Rebel into the tent for a little heat. Rebel seemed to have calmed down greatly, and with the added heat, we drifted off. Sometime during the night, I heard something that just about woke me up. I was still in a haze, so I fell asleep again immediately. I woke up one other time because I thought I heard Rebel yelp a little bit. But again, I was in and out of it. I put my hand out to pet his head, and he licked my hand gently. I fell asleep again. My wife later said she fell asleep about the same time as I did and never woke up during the night. I awoke to the most horrible noise I had ever heard come out of a 100-pound woman. Just the most god-awful shrieks I have ever heard. I never want to hear that again. I opened my eyes just in time to see this strange man at the mouth of the shaft, silhouetted against the morning daylight, looking back at us with the most twisted and evil grin I had ever seen on the face of another human. I scrambled to get free from my tightly zipped bag and the little tent while he was crouched down and grinning. I was just about free when this man-like creature disappeared. Now at the time, we were granola crunching tree huggers, anti-gun nature freaks. So the only thing that I had as a weapon was my camp knife. I found it after what seemed like hours of searching, but it was definitely under a minute. I very cautiously made my way to the entrance of the cave, millimeters at a time. This creature-like man was now gone. About that time, my wife started screaming and whimpering again, so I rushed back to the back of the shaft. She had struggled out of the tent and was pointing at what used to be Rebel. His head was nearly severed off, and the tent and bags were ruined with blood all over everything. She had blood all over her. So the first thing I did was make sure that she was not injured. Then I checked myself. We were okay. It was all from Rebel. We put on our damp, cold clothes from the night before, and then we noticed that our boots were gone. We were in serious trouble. I had some paracord, so we tied some shirts and towels around our feet and climbed back down toward the creek. We left everything in that mine shaft, except for the knife and some stuff that we shoved in our pockets. It took us 8 hours to get back down to the car, and we were like Hamburg. Hands, feet, arms, legs scraped raw, bruised, and bleeding. We jumped in and started the car. Thankfully, it started right away. And we left the dust cloud blanketing that valley as we sped down the rough trail toward Durango. We limped into the sheriff's station, and we looked like hell. We got our experience out, my wife through tears and me talking way too fast, but finally we got it out. The deputy said they would go out first thing in the morning and asked us to stay in town. We had no money for a hotel, so they let us stay in a cell after we showered and changed into some prison jumpsuits. We were there at the jail waiting for this expedition to return with a convoy of 3 trucks. I noticed that all the officers, who were quite wet and filthy, gave us dirty looks as they passed us, and the deputy that we had talked to a day before herded us back to his office. Then came the interrogation. It turns out that some sort of animal or that man-like creature had spread Rebel's remains all down the side of the creek. And he said there was nothing there, no tent, no backpacks, nothing. He asked if we had drugs on us. I did not want to admit to him that I had a little bit of herb, so I denied it. It was clear that we were fighting a losing battle. They had come to the conclusion that we were wandering out in the woods high on LSD, while a mountain lion had gotten our dog. The bastard even made us change back into our filthy, wet clothes and give back the jumpsuits right then and there. He told us that he better never see us again. We left, my wife sobbing. I have never been back to Durango. The thing that I still have nightmares about all these years later, and I have never mentioned this to even my wife, is the second time I woke up and heard Rebel yelp. Was that when his throat was ripped open? And if it was it the dog who licked my hand before I fell asleep? I still go out into the wilderness, never overnight. I'm always in well before dark, and I only go out with other people, and always carry a big gun. I respect animals, but I fear what I don't know. Now, we talked a little bit about this last Saturday Nightmares, the live stream, and we talked a little bit about what feral humans may be. And I say maybe because no one really knows 100%. There's always going to be someone who says, oh, they are this or they are that, and adamantly say it. But Nobody knows. In my own opinion, I do not believe they are human at all. I don't think they are some lost breed or lost tribe of human that, has been camping out in the woods for centuries, yada, yada. I don't think they are the deliverance type people. That TV show, The Outsiders, ironically enough, their last name was Feral. I don't consider those to be feral human either. They are just mountain people, mountain folk, people who do not want to conform to the norm, whatever the norm may be. Feral humans, which I hate that name, I think are some sort of either a genetic flaw or genetic mutation, or something along the lines of Neanderthal, Denisovian, Cro-Magnon, maybe a whole different species in of itself. I mean, we are always finding these new types of human-like creatures. I mean, just recently they found these midget-like human. They're not humans, though. That's midget-like human creatures. I say creatures because they're not people. Bottom line, they are not people. They run through trees. They use trees skillfully. They swing and jump like monkeys. I've heard multiple accounts, and I know many of you have as well. I just don't think these things are human. But here's why I think they're a little more terrifying for me. Because they seem to have an intellect. They seem to think a little more and not just react on rage or just territorial whatever, like a Bigfoot or Dogman. I don't know. That's my own opinion, and your guys' opinions are just as good as mine. So let's get into the next encounter. Narrating that encounter Saturday night, made me think of another experience. And I'm a pet lover, and I know a lot of you guys are as well. And that one just really kicked me. The next one that you're going to hear really made me smile, though. Hello, everyone. My name is Amber, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina with my dog, Captain. Captain is the love of my life. He is an Alaskan cliché husky with mostly a black coat, but with streaks of white fur around his legs and face, not to mention little rings of dark fur around his pale blue eyes that make him look like the Hamburglar. I rescued him from a shelter when he was just a puppy, right after my fiance moved out for Hong Kong for work. He helped me through the initial loneliness on nights when I just couldn't handle getting into an empty bed for the 50th time, and in the years that followed when my fiance decided he would be better off starting a family with a Chinese woman he had met through his job. Captain helped me through the heartbreak. Captain is a big guy, a subwoofer. While other dogs need walks, Captain needs hikes, which is why every weekend for the past few years, I would drive him to the Nantahala National Forest, one of the few places he could really be a dog. They are not meant to be cooped indoors. They need to run. They need to explore. They need a place like Nantahala. And coincidentally, so did I. It was a place where I could just lose myself, a place to escape the pressures of a high-pressure, high-paying job. The woods were a place of sanctuary to me, but that all changed one chilly October day when I came to realize that there is a good reason why human beings have walled themselves off in towns and cities, because the wilderness, it seems, is not our friend. Captain was always his happiest in the woods. For such a majestic animal, he has this uncanny ability to act goofy, and the woods brought that out of him in spades. He'd be so lost in the feeling of pure freedom, his blue eyes all wide, his tongue lolling from one side of his mouth, riding the waves of zoomies that inevitably had me laughing at how dorky he was acting. So you can imagine how quickly I noticed a change in his behavior, how he went from such a loud, boisterous dog to a quivering, whining wreck that barely ventured a few feet away from me at any time. And all that time I've been taking Captain out, too, I'd never seen him act in such a way. And when I laid my hand on the back of his neck to give him a stroke, I discovered he was actually trembling in fear. My first thought was mountain lion. Maybe a mountain lion is in the area, but a previous encounter with what I had figured was a predator scent trail had caused Captain to bark incessantly and became overly aggressive now that was back in last fall of last year, and that the previous summer that Nantahala had seen a sharp increase in black bear activity, with homeowners being encouraged to be much more careful surrounding issues of food disposal. It was entirely possible that Captain had sniffed out a mama bear with her cubs, and in which case he was right to be cautious. But he wasn't just cautious, he was outright terrified, and I had no idea what to make of such a situation. But being one thing clear, Captain wanted out, and consequently, so did I. There was one big problem, though, with such a plan. We had already spent 2 hours hiking into the woods. Getting out would not be quick or easy. With every step, the tension grew. Captain looked behind me with wild, terrified eyes darting ahead before doubling back to whine at me. Each footstep seemed a little quicker than the last, my utter paranoia growing to a fevered pitch. As I continued looking behind me and continually saw nothing, but something was behind us, and Captain knew it. And I could feel it. At one point, he bounded back to my side and froze, staring off into the dense forest. As he sniffed at the air before him, I thought that worse was over, but I was horribly wrong. With a yelp so loud that it hurt my ears, he burst off through the trees ahead, howling barks, punctuating his canine gallop. That's when I heard it, a rustling in the trees behind me, and with terror so rampant, I can still feel it. To this day, I heard something behind me breathing, and it was huge. I just ran, following the sound of Captain's bark crashing through the dense trees as dry branches tore at my bare skin and my face. There are many times in my life where I had been uncomfortably anxious or scared. This experience dwarfed them all. No emotion can compare to that of knowing you are being hunted by something you can't see, something you can't reason or bargain with, something that will crush your bones into meal and not feel a frickin' thing. I ran harder and longer than I ever had in my entire life. So intensely that when I finally had to draw a breath, I found myself dry retching against a tree trunk out of exhaustion, out of fear, and out of pure biological imperative, making me as light and mobile as possible. But there could be no respite. Captain's furious barks made that abundantly clear. We had to keep moving. It was that or be eaten alive. With tears in my eyes, I carried on running, hurtling through the forest, the thicket so dense. I was running half blind, which was made painfully obvious when I caught my foot on a fallen tree trunk and was sent flying into the dirt. The impact knocked the wind out of me with an ugly grunt, and as I rolled onto my back, struggling for breath, I saw Captain appear at my side. He had been my hero so many times before and was not about to fail me now. His barks were wild, full of rage, his sharp teeth exposed as he poured a raw force of his being into the woods behind us. It was terrifying, awe-inspiring to behold, and in a moment I thanked God that he was at my side. But not even Captain could maintain the display, for when the unseen thing hunting us seemed to roar back through the trees, Captain was silenced. He rushed over to me, taking the collar of my waterproof jacket between his teeth and trying to drag me along the forest floor. But I was renewed by terror, my biological imperative by the raw need to survive. In an instant, I was back to my feet, running, panting, scrambling for life. I remember there being a moment when I was terrified that Captain might leave me, how the fear might prove too much for him to handle. There was so much of a force for him to escape into, but he never once failed that to double back and find me. Even when he was out of sight, he made sure to continue barking ferociously, so I'd know exactly where to run to. That was until I burst through a set of practically thick brush to find Captain standing stationary at a riverbank. It was not all that wide or at all that deep, but it was enough of an obstacle to halt his progress. You see, Captain hates water. I don't know if it was something that happened to him as a puppy before I adopted him from the shelter, but Captain has always hated pools, rivers, lakes. You couldn't get him to go within 6 feet of them, which is why seeing that river in that way terrified me on a whole new level. Out of pure instinct, I just jumped across. Like I said, it was not that wide. But the exhaustion of running for so long, I only barely made the jump. I turned knowing that Captain wouldn't even attempt to jump without encouragement or direction. My voice was trembling as I spoke. "Come on, boy. Come to Mama. Please jump. Come to Mama." It was horrendous watching his eyes, full of confusion, saying without words, "Why are you making me do this?" I watched him pace up and down the bank as this thing hunting us was growing closer and closer. In the end, I'm begging him, pleading with him, promising steak dinners for an entire year if he would only get himself across that river. For a moment he froze, sizing up the gap, before sprinting off back among the trees. Again, that terrified feeling gripped me. He couldn't do it. He was so terrified of water that in a moment of pure panic, he fled back in the direction of that monster chasing us. It felt like an eternity standing there on that riverbank, praying that he would reappear, somehow convincing myself that he wouldn't. Only did. In a glorious moment, he burst through the foliage, hurtling toward the river's edge at a breakneck speed. As he reached the bank, his legs unfurled like springs, sending him sailing through the air, high above the river. It's funny, the little details you remember from a traumatic event. And even the one thing that sticks out with me was Captain's eyes as he jumped that river. They were huge, these massive blue circles that seemed to shine out from the rings of black fur around them, almost like he couldn't quite believe what he was doing, and quite frankly, neither could I. I mean, it's when I say he was like an action hero in some hyperbolic 80s movie. The bravery he displayed is something I feel I can only aspire to. Even his landing was dramatic. He barely made it across, and as he scrambled up the dirt embankment, I leapt towards him. I grabbed him by his collar and pulled him up onto solid ground. When we were up, he took off again with renewed speed, seemingly more terrified of that water than would have been stalking us. I had tears in my eyes before. At that moment I broke down, completely calling after him with staggering breathing. Good boy, Captain. Good boy. I continued to run, feeling my thighs burn, my feet ache from what felt like miles upon miles. I was so short of breath, so exhausted, I thought I was going to pass out at any moment. When I say I could literally hear my own heart beating in my throat, I'm not exaggerating in that slightest. I am not an unfit person either. I dance and take spin class. I have stamina, but running at almost a constant sprint for a better part of an hour made it feel like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. By the time I reached the peak of yet another gentle incline, my legs gave out from under me. I remember seeing silvery white patches appear in my vision, and no matter how hard I drew breath, I just couldn't seem to get enough oxygen. When I saw something moving in front of me, something that definitely wasn't Captain, I thought that was it. I thought I'd pass out and never wake up again, having been torn apart by whatever creature was chasing us. I woke up in a seat of a 4-seat pickup truck. As soon as I found the strength to sit up, I heard a voice outside the stationary vehicle to shout, "Hey, she's awake." Suddenly the door opened, and a person I had never seen before in my life was offering me a plastic water bottle and asking if I was okay. I didn't speak. I just took the water from him and gulped it like 3/4 of the way down in one long, sweet chug. By the time I regained my senses, I was panicking. I couldn't see Captain anywhere. I looked at the stranger, dressed in his hunting gear, trying to summon the strength to ask him where my dog was, although the words just wouldn't come. But the look on my face must have told it all. He needed to know. When he told me Captain was fine, he was just inside their hunting lodge getting a bite to eat. I just cried with relief. I was so overjoyed. He was okay, but that's not what made me burst into tears. The hunter told me that for a while Captain wouldn't follow any of them out of the truck. No matter how much meat was offered, he just stayed at my side, yelping and whining and waiting for me. Wake up for a couple hours, I joined the hunters in their lodge eating hamburger they offered me. Slowly, when I regained my strength, I told them exactly what had happened. How Captain had freaked out after we stumbled across what I assumed was a black bear, but black bears are relatively small. Certainly not as big as grizzlies, and certainly not as big as whatever was chasing us through those woods. I raised the issue with them and asked them what they thought it may be. I thought they may have an answer being seasoned hunters, but they didn't. There was this weird, awkward silence as they exchanged looks before one of them spoke out, telling me that they just didn't know. I asked if it was possible to be a grizzly bear, if it could make its way down from the Rockies, with one responding that was possible. But that was a lie, an outright lie. Those hunters quite possibly saved my life. And for that I will be eternally grateful. But I know they lied to me. Grizzlies don't make it anywhere near North Carolina at any time of the year. I've done my fair amount of research into what chased me that day, but I've been unable to come up with anything conclusive. The only thing I know for sure is those hunters were hiding something, and as long as they do, people will continue to go missing in that stretch of North Carolina woodland. Captain is lying right next to me, right next to my computer chair, actually, as I type this out, ever faithful, ever watching in my darkest moments. I wonder, however, I am going to last without Captain. So, I myself, on that experience, believe that her and her dog were stalked by a dogman. Nantahala, I've had countless subscriber experiences. There are countless other experiences that are on the internet from that region. Also, there was a FBI photographer, a woman and her husband, that she had gone out that way in Nantahala to take photos of Dogman. There were multiple, like a small pack in the area. She was found dead in the middle of this woodsy patch of that national forest. Her husband was cleared of any charges. The family, of course, blamed him because he lived. But then he disappeared. Not in the woods, but he disappeared in public, like just gone. Like the government took him and said, don't say anything to anyone. We're going to relocate you. We're giving you a whole new life. Just shut up. The house that they owned he has never gone to that house. He never sold the house. The sister of the woman handles the estate. He has never taken money out of the bank account. In my own opinion, I believe the government silenced him. They either silenced him or moved him into a whole new life and silenced him that way. So let's get into tonight's final experience. It was the winter of 2001 in rural Georgia, about 1 a.m. And yeah, you guessed it, nothing but trees and fields with scattered houses every mile or so. The only source of light was the trace of a full moon that was settled behind some clouds and leafless trees. It had been a little bit warmer than usual during the daytime, creating the perfect atmosphere for a foggy night. The day had been tiring. I was a senior in high school at the time, and with that came the normal stresses that everyone knows too well. On top of that, I also played basketball, thus the reason for such a late night drive in what most people would consider the middle of nowhere. We had lost yet another game, but everyone was still in high spirits because Christmas vacation was coming soon, and we always had fun coming back from games, no matter if we won or lost. The ride from the game was no issue. It was late, yeah, but the ride had no issues. There are always stories of deer running out in front of vehicles during the late night to early morning during the fall and winter in rural areas. It had happened to me personally a year or so prior, so I would and still do constantly look around to the sides of the road, even if I'm not driving. No, the real experience starts when I'm driving home from school after the bus dropped us off. After saying goodbye to my friends and getting home safe to everyone on the team, I loaded myself and my gym bag into my rodeo and started taking the half-hour drive home. As I stated before, this is nothing but rural southern roads, long stretches of nothing but woods and farmland as far as the eye can see. It was on one of these long stretches of woods that I saw it, and even after over 20 years, I still remember every single second of the encounter, and every time I come back home to my parents' house, I will still look for it in that same area I spotted it in. I was half a mile from my house listening to tunes. I don't recall exactly what I was listening to. Maybe Creed or something like that. What I do remember is the cold wind whipping through my hair as I drove down the darkened 2-lane country road. I always rode with the windows down and the AC running when it was late, especially during the winter. The cold breeze that both created as I sped up the road always kept me awake when I had a long day behind me. I wasn't speeding, maybe 40 miles an hour down a lonely road. Just enough to create that cold breeze I needed to stay awake. Suddenly, the fog started to grow thicker, causing me to slow down a bit more. As a few people can imagine, the road like the one I was driving on was not very wide. There are no shoulders to this road, and there are no streetlights, so a sudden push of fog all around it made it much harder to see any animal that could run out into the road. The ditches are on either side of the road are deep on this particular stretch. There is a creek that runs through the woods there, and it passes through a culvert under the road. I felt something off, like something was about to happen, which caused me to slow down even more and roll up my window as I strained to see against the foggy darkness. I slammed on the brakes, nearly causing my manual shift SUV to shut down because my foot slipped off the clutch, when I see a blur to my right running right into the road in front of me. The animal was black against the whitish-gray fog that had become even thicker, and to my surprise, it looked like a very large black wolf. A little side note, Georgia is home to different large predators, black bear, alligator, coyote, and, though Georgia DNR vehemently denies, mountain lion. I have personally been stalked while driving slowly on an ATV by this animal, and have to roll my eyes at DNR's statement that people have misidentified a bobcat for a mountain lion. I grew up in the woods and know the difference between the two. I think everybody knows, how, and that's true. DNR, no matter where you are, they've actually, when me and my daughter were coming back from Saratoga, this huge cat ran in front of a blue Ford Ranger. And I'll never forget it. It was a little blue Ford Ranger. This thing was a little bigger than a German Shepherd, a buff colored tan, and just gone, long tail. I called DEC, and they told me it was probably a bobcat. I called the state police, and they said, probably a mountain lion. And I said, they told me they don't exist. And the state trooper then said, they tell everyone that. And that's not a lie. I grew up in the woods of Georgia, and I know the difference between the two. I also know that we have gray wolves and red wolves in Georgia, and have seen one in the field around town. They are bigger than coyote and definitely bigger than dog. This black wolf I stared out at, stood in front of me, was even larger than a gray wolf. I continued to stare out in front of me, trying to figure out what I'm looking at. I knew it was a wolf, but couldn't wrap my head around its size, nor could I figure out why it was just standing there. I did not want to move. It just didn't feel right to startle an animal that was sitting there. I thought maybe it was stunned by my high beams, so I flicked the brights off to hopefully allow it to go on its way. That was a big mistake. As soon as I lessened the brightness of my headlights, the animal turned toward the car and stared directly at me. I froze as I made eye contact with it, hoping that it was just my tired brain making me think that the look in its eyes were more intelligent than a regular canine. It wasn't very long until my curiosity turned to horror as I noticed that while I was watching it, the wolf started to stand on its hind legs. That's when I noticed its hands. Yeah, it had hands. Large, somewhat human-like hands. Long, gnarled fingers at the end with what looked like razor-sharp claws. I continued to stare into the eyes of this creature in what I felt was a relative safeness of my vehicle until it reached its full height. I knew what I had seen previously was a large wolf. It must have mutated or shape-shifted or something because this thing was over 7 feet tall. During this time, my mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing, but it failed miserably. I froze behind the steering wheel of my car as I look to the right. As I look to the right of this creature before me. Before this, I had never believed in experiences or stories about Bigfoot, aliens, and of course, werewolves or dogmen. Ghosts? Yeah, I'm a southerner through and through, though I have been living in the northern states for over 17 years. So the South has a plethora of ghost stories, and I have had a few of my own. But those are for another day. While my mind is trying to wrap itself around what I had seen, I had failed to notice right away that I had taken a couple steps toward my car. When this finally registered, I gasped slightly as I took into full profile this beast. Before it merely seen the side view of this creature. Now, however, I could see it in full horror. The chest of this thing was more like a male human who has been trained for bodybuilding contests, but the bottom half was more decidedly wolf-like, save for an extremely large back paws that reminded me of Wile E. Coyote from Looney Tunes, but more of a frightful version, like if Guillermo del Toro had created him. I stare in abject horror for what feels like forever as it continues to stare at me with hateful, hungry eyes. Suddenly its gaze shifted from me into the woods on the opposite side of the road. Hopefully prey that was easier to get to, my mind begged as I continued to watch through the windshield. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw it run across the road into the woods. After that, my mind kicked into high gear, and I had the sense to floor it before this thing decided to come back, nearly stripping the gears as I fumbled with this gear shift to get away as fast as I could. Once I felt I was considerable distance from the creature, I slowed down to a speed that was nowhere near reckless. During this time, I glanced back down at the clock of the car to see what time it was, because I felt like I had spent so much time staring at the creature that my parents would surely be upset that I had not come home in a time frame that I should have. Only a couple minutes had passed. Surely it had to have been much longer. I thought to myself as I tried to remember what song I had played in my CD player of that car. What song is now playing? None of it made sense, despite the air conditioning blasting through the vents of a chilly December night. I'm sweating, and yet chills are running down my spine. I made it to the three-way stop out between several fields and took a moment trying to collect myself. Sure, every part of me was screaming to get me home ASAP before it decided to try its luck with me. But my mind still went through the motions I knew so well. This four-way stop has had several bad accidents. Teens deciding the desolate road was a perfect drag race meet. Also the occasional drunk driver who don't stop for stop signs. I took several calming breaths as I slowly traversed the turn. Nothing happened as I made my way home safely. In the back of my mind, however, my imagination came up with all sorts of frightful things that awaited me when I stepped out of my car. These thoughts were unwarranted as I rushed from my car with a flashlight in the carport. I quickly glanced about the darkened woods that surrounded my house as I fumbled for my keys. I took several more breaths to allow myself to get the key into the lock and finally enter my parents' house. My parents were asleep, so I was lucky that I didn't have to explain why I seemed frazzled. They would never believe it anyway. I never again saw this creature. I never wanted to see it again. But the part of me wanted to know more and if anyone else had seen anything like it. I never mentioned it to anyone, though, and this happened during the time that a lot of people in the rural area of the South didn't have the internet. We were lucky as we had dial-up, but I didn't know how to search the internet back then and only used the computer to play games like solitaire and to write papers for school. It wasn't until I was a little older did I finally find out what could have been and found out in that region. Back then I always suspected it was a werewolf, but my rational mind would never accept a creature of folklore. Today I understand that every folklore has a basis of truth. So, I believe I saw a Dogman that December night, 2001. Thank you for allowing me to share. All right, guys. Upstate New York is in the middle of another heat wave. I'm sure the majority of our country is at that. It is midnight, and it is 90 degrees in my downstairs studio. God, it's only going to get hotter. Anyway, cannot wait to have Brad on so you guys can hear this amazing experience that he's going to share with us. With that, I want to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you very much. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop searching for the truth, never stop searching for the answers or questioning. Just never stop. Because once you do, that's when you conform, that's when you become a lamb, and none of us are lamb. God bless.